So we found a Forbes article that talks about how the nonprofit sector is broken and how to start fixing it. Let's talk about it.
Hi, we are Ted and Lisa Snyder, and we are nonprofit consultants because we believe a better world needs healthier nonprofits. The nonprofit sector, in a lot of ways, is broken. And as we were looking through this article from Forbes, they had some really interesting points as to why that's the case. So we want to discuss them a little bit. The link for this article will be in the description below if you want to read it for yourself. But let's just jump into some of the things that they talk about.
Yeah, so right away they talk about how the metrics for success don't always capture effectiveness. And we've talked about this a lot. Actually, we just recorded a video talking about metrics to keep track of that are not obvious. And that's so true with nonprofits. The metrics that you should be tracking as a nonprofit leader are not always the obvious ones. The obvious ones are how much money is coming in, how many volunteers do we have, how many events did we do, did a lot of people show up to the event?
But even for those, they don't necessarily capture effectiveness. How much money did you bring in? Well, did the money go to the cause? How many volunteers did you have? Did you spend 300 volunteer hours not accomplishing anything? It's really difficult because even before or earlier today, I was Googling metrics for businesses, and there's a huge bunch of KPIs, key performance indicators, and you can find list upon list upon list upon list. Metrics for nonprofits pops up, and it's like donations, how many people did you help? And those are good, but they're not necessarily it just isn't as clear as a lot of the business stuff, the for-profit that's out there.
And I'd say too, they can easily kind of get separated into a couple groups. There are metrics that are really, really good that measure the growth of your organization. And then there are measurements and metrics that are really, really good for communicating the effectiveness of your organization to potential donors, volunteers. And sometimes they're not the same, right? A donor doesn't care how much money you raised. They care what you did with the money.
Right.
But you care how much money you raised because that's going to allow you to do stuff.
Because you got to do the stuff. So
Right.
Understanding that there are different metrics and not all metrics are equal depending on who you're talking to. So you're bringing up the right ones, super important. This also says not all metrics show the effectiveness. One issue that we see in nonprofits is a nonprofit will say, we're going to help out this one cause. In the angle that they take it at, they might be able to say, we help this many people do X, Y, and Z. But depending on what they're doing, it might just be a Band-Aid solution. It might not actually be helping the cause as a whole. Tom Shoes, ages ago, when they were doing the buy one, give one, they have a really cool model within their business, but they did have to adjust it over time because they started to realize that as they were giving all of these shoes to communities, that they were putting shoemakers out of business. And so
in those communities.
So it was actually making the situation worse because they were getting rid of people who were earning money to sustain their families. And so they had to make some adjustments to their business. And thankfully, they recognized it. They saw it. They made some adjustments to it. But that was one of those things. They had great metrics. It was effective in some ways, but very ineffective and actually detrimental in other ways. And so knowing this, just because you have the metrics for it doesn't mean it's effective. And that is a problem in the nonprofit realm.
I'd say a solution to this is listen to people who have concerns or maybe even dissensions about how you're going about trying to achieve your mission. You don't have to listen to every single thing. It can be really demoralizing if you're just constantly listening to naysayers or whatever. But do keep an ear out because every once in a while, someone might bring up a really, really good point. And I'm sure as the leaders of Tom's Shoes, they were looking at stuff. This probably was just a blind spot that they were missing, but someone caught it. And someone said, hey, we might be hurting the economy of the places that we're sending these shoes to. And the leader said, that's a big deal. We need to look into that. Instead of saying, nope. Our mission is we deliver shoes, and they just kind of plastered over it.
And
that's
the
a big
cool
problem.
thing, because of that person who brought it up and then the leader making adjustments, it's actually trickled down into other organizations. I know another organization that feeds people in other countries, and they have stopped including rice in their packages because they were putting rice farmers out of business. And so they started to recognize we need to do this in a way that supports the economy, because if we destroy economies through trying to help, There are long-term impacts that we can't even fully foresee. And so
Mhm.
understanding this, really, really important.
Absolutely.
And being willing to listen, or at least hear enough that you can decide whether or not
Mhm.
you want to listen
And
further
checking your pride
is really
enough
good.
to know that like my solution isn't necessarily the best solution.
Yeah. There's a great book about that, When Helping Hurts, that if you want to
Mhm.
take a look at that as a nonprofit leader. All
All
right.
right. Secondarily, they kind of jump into how the board is not equipped to provide proper governance. We see this happen a lot because people are kind of scrambling in the early days of their organization to just put a board together, or maybe they have a board member retire and they're one board member short according to their bylaws. So now they're scrambling to find another board member and they're scraping the bottom of the barrel. So they end up with just a warm body who's in the board and isn't actually, maybe they don't care but they have the right qualifications, or maybe they care but they don't have any qualifications, or somewhere in between.
Yeah. We've seen board members who actually have background who can really, really help because they can look at the leader and just say, hey, here's issues that we're seeing. And they can kind of forecast what's coming up in the future. And they can kind of say, just looking at the direction that we're going, we think there could be an issue in this area. Let's do what we can to mitigate it now. Other times, the board just isn't equipped. It's full of people who really like the leader personally. And that's kind of the
Mm,
extent of their qualifications. I am willing to support you. But if the board isn't equipped to offer the governance that they need to be offering for the organization as a whole, that causes an issue for the organization as a whole because you can end up with a leader that's just running in a direction that's maybe not as effective or could be unethical. Or you can end up with a leader who is trying to do it all, but they don't have anyone who's looking over their shoulder going, hey, maybe consider X, Y, and Z.
yeah.
So the governance is really important. And as much as the leader in a nonprofit typically wants the board to just kind of shut up and let them do their job, we need their outside opinion to make sure that things are running really well. Because when you're leading, it's hard to allow staff members, donors, volunteers to be the ones trying to point those things out because a lot of times they have motives that are their own.
Mhm.
Where the board is going to very much support your vision, your mission, your leadership, but also be able to look for those red flags if they know what red flags to look for.
Yeah, and with the caveat that you have done a good job of selecting board members,
Yeah.
because there are also self-serving board members out there.
Hmm.
There are those board members from hell that get there because you weren't careful about that board member selection process. So if you're a new nonprofit putting together how that's done, make sure that that's done with diligence.
Yes. Spending is restricted in a way that prohibits innovation and hiring. Spending in nonprofits is
It's tricky.
it's tricky. It's very tricky. But a lot of times the things that the money is spent on is short term, the things that are kind of screaming at you. And we understand it can be really hard as a nonprofit leader when you see the bills coming up, you know that you have staff whose salaries you need to pay or hourly wages, whatever they might be. And you might be saying there's not a ton of money and trying to make those decisions. Do you make them for today or do you make them for 6 months from now or a year from now or 2 years from now? And what we've found is when spending is restricted in a way that specifically makes it so that learning and growth and actually improving the knowledge and the abilities of your staff when that is restricted or in other areas, it's really, really bad for your organization because it creates a stagnant environment that eventually gets really stinky.
Right. And this happens for a few reasons that spending gets restricted in this way. One is just there's a just a cultural thing that if you're a charity and I donate $1 to the charity that helps children in Africa, that child in Africa is going to get $1. And that is unrealistic, unfortunately. Like part of it has to go toward making sure the dollar even gets there, right?
Yeah.
And so you got to factor that in, right? So, but people have this mindset: if I donate $100, it's going to all go to the thing. And so, as a nonprofit leader, you have to do a really good job of being transparent and upfront with how the dollar is spent. You know, if I give you $20 today, what does that do? What does that accomplish?
Yeah.
And you want to do a really good job of laying that out and organizing it in a way that the maximum amount goes directly toward the cause, but just helping people to understand that operational expenses are part of helping the cause,
Yeah.
and then helping them to understand that we're doing our best to make sure operational expenses aren't bloated.
Yeah. But I mean, one thing I hear nonprofits say is like 100% goes toward this, or 97% goes toward this, or 83%. People don't care about your percentages. They want to know what difference they're making. So if you can say, if you give $20, here's what we're going to be able to do with it. And if someone asks,
Yeah.
does all the money go toward it? Just be honest and say, honestly, we try and make as much money go toward it as possible. But in order for it to be effective, we have to have staff and we have to have systems in place. So most of the money goes toward that, or whatever you can say. But sometimes we get so focused on nonprofits comparing our percentages to other percentages of other nonprofits that we forget that people just don't care. Like they don't.
They want to know about effectiveness. They're asking about effectiveness, but they don't know how to ask it other than to say how much of my money goes directly to the kids or whatever.
I do like that this article mentions Dan Paletto's TED Talk, which is one of my favorite TED Talks about nonprofits.
If you haven't seen it, you need to check it out.
Yeah, I will link it in the description below because it's highly important, but it actually talks about this, why hiring and other spending is so low within nonprofit works.
All right, it says the sector lacks people who represent the cause. Interesting.
This is interesting. I actually need to read this one a little bit more.
Let's go ahead. The talent that many NGOs hire typically have some kind of privilege. They're people who have financial support elsewhere and a safety net to take this on.
Yeah. So here again, we're functioning without people who represent the beneficiaries. Well, yes, kind of. I mean, for a lot of nonprofits, the people that you're trying to help are generally people who, if they worked for you, didn't need the help. Right? Am I wrong about that?
Well,
I feel like that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I do think that there is a way that as people actually get the help that they need, if eventually you can create a way for them to start serving within your organization, create positions for them in your organization, this can be highly beneficial to your organization because it diminishes that communication gap between the leaders of the organization and the people that are trying to be helped. There are times that leadership will come into an area and try and fix something in an area and not actually know what's going on in the area. There's a nonprofit leader I was talking to a few years ago, and they wanted to go help a specific community, but they weren't connected to the community. They didn't know people in the community, and they were kind of guessing at what the community needed. And so when that community had a crisis happen, they were bringing stuff down to the community, but it wasn't what people were looking for. It wasn't the support that they needed, but they were removed, but they were also raising money for it because they were the good person going into it. They kind of had a little bit of a savior complex while at the same time not having that connection. So
the cool thing, I think, with the advent of the internet and people being more connected and able to get information easier and connect with people around the globe, I think we're seeing a really hopeful trend toward nonprofits actually having a lot more of an understanding of what their cause needs because they're able to talk to the people they're helping a little bit easier, and they're able to have those connections more.
So I do agree with this in one area. In another area, I'm like, maybe.
I just think it's starting to become like the cool kid thing to do when you're a nonprofit is to make sure that you're doing it right.
Right.
I think it used to be like, we're just going to send money to wherever and that it's going to make us feel good. And now it's like the cool kids know how to figure out how to do it right.
They actually care.
Yeah.
Because there was a time when nonprofits did not care. As long as their cause was being advanced, they didn't care how the cause impacted the community.
Right.
Where now that has definitely changed. I do think, though, that there are times that the people who have been helped by a nonprofit do struggle to get that label removed of you were the cause. And so as people, maybe they need a service for a season or they need some help for a season, but then if they get to a place where they're on their feet and able to actually help the cause, There are times that nonprofit leaders forever see that person through the lens of you were the person that we helped versus you are now the person who can do the helping. And so I think nonprofits, if you can figure this out, there's something special about seeing people come full circle and go from the place where they needed the help to be able to walk into a situation and say, I was in this situation and now I have a better understanding of the help that I wish that I received, and I get to give back now to the community that I came from and the people I care about.
And that should be extra incentive to build your nonprofit with the idea of legacy and longevity. So that way you can have a chance to see those full circle stories come around and support your organization, both from a story standpoint and from just their own support. They're like, hey, you know what? You helped me to get on my feet, and now I'm going to help somebody else to get on their feet.
Yeah. Now, I do like their final point. How do you help? Leaders can take action.
Yep.
And this is really what it comes down to. As nonprofit leaders, whether you're at the top of the organization or you're a leader in the middle of the organization, you need to recognize the issues that are making nonprofits across the board fail or struggle in massive ways that make people from the outside looking in going, why are you even doing this? But the minute that we can start to see what the issues are, we can start to take action. Now, you might be in the middle of an organization going, but I don't have a board. Well, as a leader, you should have advisors, you should have mentors, and you should have a few people that you trust who are allowed to speak into your life and into your leadership when they see something that could potentially go sideways in the future. But with all these issues, you can take action to start helping your organization as a whole start moving in a better direction, whether it's the entire organization or your team. Every leader needs to understand what's going on and find ways to help mitigate these issues because these are real issues within the nonprofit sector.
Right. And so with that, if you want to learn a little bit more how to have an effective team, we got a video that you can check out right now. We think you'd find highly valuable. Go ahead and click on that and we'll see you over there.